Brickyard live stream, whether you're watching us right now, live in the present, or after the fact. We appreciate you joining us. And today we are going over every single move so far in the NFL offseason. We had free agency start this week. We had some massive trades with players like DK Metcalf, Geno Smith, and a couple of quarterbacks moving around the NFL. So we're going to break down every single move because we don't just talk about the Cowboys. We don't just talk about LeBron and the Lakers. We talk about every single team because we are the show for every single sports fan. But this week felt like Christmas. We have like the Super Bowl, then it was kind of quiet. And then suddenly this week, we just kind of got an explosion of news. We had the Celtics and Lakers set a record for the most watched NBA game in 7 years. And then suddenly DK Metcalf is the Steeler. Ben Roethlisberger saying he wants to come out of retirement. I mean, what world did I wake up in the second week of March?
Yeah, that's insane. I didn't hear about Big Ben, but we got DK Metcalf going to the Steelers for, I believe it was a second round pick. He goes, Seahawks start an entire new rebuild. They pair him with George Pickens, and then whoever ultimately falls into their lap, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, whether it's Russell Wilson, but they have they're figuring out their quarterback now. But DK pairing him with George Pickens, and honestly, just based on their personalities, whether or not they're going to win a playoff game is the real question. We don't know. But this is going to easily be the most entertaining wide receiver core, both talent wise and the fact you have George Pickens who's going to punch a ref. You have DK Metcalf that's going to get a fight with a corner there. It's gonna at least be exciting for the eyeballs and for those who enjoy football.
Yeah, for those who enjoy football, and like, believe me when I say this, if Aaron Rodgers is not the starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year, you know who will be? You know who else you could bring in outside of Russell Wilson? And if you're going to go out there and draft a quarterback, you might as well bring this guy in as well. It's like, it's obviously going to be Jameis Winston. Like, he has to be the third backup where you draft a rookie this year. Maybe you consider Aaron Rodgers or moving on from Russell Wilson, but like, you're probably going to have Russ. Okay, Russ and DK kind of have some rapport. He had a little bit of rapport with George Pickens this year, but yeah, this is going to be one of the most entertaining teams next year. And I know Hard Knocks did like the race for the AFC North Hard Knocks, but like, can we still get like a Steelers Hard Knocks like into the offseason? Like, I feel like a offseason Steelers Hard Knocks with George Pickens and DK Metcalf would be absolutely electric. And then you just throw in some of the bizarre content we would get from Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I would love it. I think are they even doing Hard Knocks this year? I think they have. It was initially going to be UNC, but then they backed out of it. Nobody wants to do it because of the Giants. Thanks Giants for ruining off-season content. But the Steelers, at least, like we'd have Russ corniness, we'd have Mike Tomlin there, and then some of the defensive figures they have there. It would at least make for interesting content in the offseason. But no, Giants had to ruin it. Bill Belichick had to ruin it. And now we have to basically just wait for the latest news, thanks to Ian Rappaport.
Yeah, no, you'd have Cam Hayward there, but what were your overall thoughts? Because we talked about DK being available last week, and then suddenly he goes to the Steelers. For me, it kind of just like came out of nowhere, and like, I didn't really have any strong feelings on it right away because, like, for me, I can't really have any strong feelings on this until they have a different quarterback there because I can't believe in this team getting to the Super Bowl and I can't believe in them really winning if Russell Wilson's there. Sure, you have DK Metcalf and George Pickens, but like, I just don't believe in it right now.
I feel like there was a better fit for DK. I just for the Steelers, like I'm happy they went out and got another receiver, but you pair him with a guy that I feel like has a similar play style to George Pickens. They're both deep threats. They both have great hands. They both can play, have a good contested catch. But again, like you mentioned it, like is it going to be Russell Wilson? Is it going to be somebody they draft? Like at the end of the day, their window didn't close for me. Like ultimately, it's going to be they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to lose in the first round, and I mean it's exciting to see GK there because the Steelers have had a lot of great receivers over the last decade, but ultimately it's not going to matter. They don't have a quarterback. Their defense lost some key players as well. And it's another year in the Mike Tomlin system where they haven't done shit in the playoffs. They're still going to go 9-8 or 10-7, but it's not going to matter because even with DK and George Pickens, they just lost some of their running game. I just don't see them really doing much ultimately.
Yeah, no, I don't see him doing much. And like I feel like you just traded for DK Metcalf. You're like, fuck it. We're not gonna be paying Russell Wilson. We're probably gonna go after a rookie quarterback, and we're not gonna be paying a quarterback any long-term money. So we might as well go out there and get DK Metcalf and just pay him because like honestly, like part of me is like, sure, like you went out there and traded for him, but like him and George Pickens have similar issues where with DK Metcalf, we've been critical of him on the show where he should be easily in the running for best wide receiver year in and year out. And sometimes it feels like he's not even mentioned in the top 10, where I feel like he should easily be a top five receiver skill wise. And sometimes he's just a little bit inconsistent. He's had some injury issues over the past few years. And now you just paid him this much money. Like for me, I think the Steelers are like, we just don't have a quarterback right now, so we can afford to pay him. Why don't we go out there and get DK so we'll solve all of our wide receiver issues? But like I'm looking back at it, like the Steelers are pretty good at drafting wide receivers. Like they normally don't make massive swings like this, at least for receivers. Like typically they just draft them in house. Like you pay Antonio Brown because you drafted him. You drafted Hines Ward as well. Pretty much everyone else there was also like a homegrown guy, unless they're like a number one or two.
Yeah, and they got the Emmanuel Sanders of the world as well. George Pickens was another one of their farmed prospects. So like they can draft receivers probably better than really any team outside of maybe the Vikings. So I agree with that notion. I think ultimately their plan is this year they're going to go after like a Kirk Cousins or an Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, a short-term rental solution, and then next year maybe they go after a more loaded quarterback class. I know that this past time they drafted a quarterback, it was in the weakest quarterback draft maybe in the history of the NFL. I mean, Kenny Pickett went in the first round, but everybody else, whether it was Desmond Ritter or ultimately Brock Purdy, like was horrendous. So if I'm the Steelers, like go out and get Kirk Cousins for a year. You're going to be the same Steelers that you always are. And then next year, when you have a much loaded draft, then go out there and get somebody that is actually going to be your future. Because ultimately, I just don't think that whoever they go in after this draft is going to be their solution.
Yeah, but we'll see. But we had a busy first week of free agency, and we want to break down every single move for you here. So we are starting in the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills, and the biggest news was Josh Allen agreed to a new 6 year, $330 million deal with $250 million guaranteed, and that is now the biggest contract in sports, passing Jason Tatum's contract. Jason Tatum's a 5 year, $314 million deal, and then Josh Allen just passes him with 6 years, 330 million, 250 guaranteed. So now you have him locked up, and that's pretty much going to be the end of his career. There is that 6 year deal, and then it's over.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get paid, and he's got his MVP now. He's made a couple of AFC title games, but he got paid. He's now the highest paid quarterback in the league. Um, but ultimately, didn't take a discount like he might have, like maybe Mahomes or Brady would have. But getting paid. Some people want to get paid. Some people want trophies, and ultimately he wants paid. So I don't hate it for Josh Allen for the Bills. How is that going to help them get their next great receiver? How is it going to help them get another top defensive player? I guess we'll see. But I'm happy for Josh Allen. He deserves to get paid.
Yeah, no, I'm happy for Josh Allen as well. That is a massive deal, and 250 million guaranteed. Like that's $250 million. That's a huge amount of money. So credit to Josh Allen. You had your MVP season, went out there and got it done. But for the Bills, their long term future, like I don't know. Is this the best thing for the team? Probably not. But for Josh Allen, like absolutely, go out there and get your money. Because like if I was a player, the difference between like $50 million and having a Super Bowl and $50 million, like in the back of your mind, like honestly, I might rather have the $50 million. Like in retrospect.
I mean, at the end of the day, he's probably still a Hall of Famer, and he's probably still going to be considered with. it's going to be Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, and you know those big four, and maybe Jalen Hurts is in there. He's still going to go down as a Hall of Famer at the end of the day, most likely. So trading that away for a Super Bowl, you could blame it on Mahomes. Like, I don't know. Not always like a top priority. I know he wants to win it in Buffalo, so I don't see him leaving either. So I don't know. Respect to him, but either way, he'll be a Hall of Famer most likely.
Yeah, and I don't like. I don't know. Like, if you're gonna go out there and get paid, like, I feel like people won't hold that against you if you don't win. Like, okay, he went out there and got his money. Like, it's a job at the end of the day, and playoffs are just kind of like extra curricular.
Yeah, and
But
ultimately too, like, yeah, who else did they sign?
yeah, so they went out there, fear not, you went out there and spent $250 million on Josh Allen, close to $330 million. And then he went out there and signed Darrington Evans. Congratulations. He agreed to a deal. Ty Johnson re signed. You got re signed Reggie Gilman, and you signed Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir, edge rusher Joey Bosa, edge Michael Hoyt, Gregory Russo signed a deal. You got Larry Okunjobi. You got Terrell Bernard. You got safety Derek Forrest. DeMar Hamlin re-signed a 1 year deal. Congratulations. And then a Reed Ferguson. So honestly, some sneaky good signings there. I like the Joey Bosa signing for them. If he can stay healthy and he kind of save him for the playoffs. And then I feel like Josh Palmer is just going to be another fine receiver. You replace Mac Hollins with him. So I feel like overall, pretty solid. I like that defensive tackle signing as well of Larry Okunjobi.
Yeah, Larry Ogunjobi, great fit. I think Joey Bosa, if him and Von Miller can stay healthy, they're going to have a pretty good defensive line. It was relatively good last season as well. They lost some key figures. Mac Hollins, he was a nice receiver for them. He goes to the Patriots. He'll be successful there. But you replace him with Josh Palmer. You add the linebacker Joey Bosa. So I do think that the Bills got a little bit better. Ultimately, I think their defense should be a little scarier. And then you also locked up Khalil Shakir, who also was also very instrumental last year. So I like where they're headed. If they can draft a receiver, then I think they'll be in business next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they'll be in business as well, but really just have to focus on drafting that wide receiver and kind of growing them in house. Stefan Diggs really didn't try and work to control a star there. So if you have him and you can mentor him and grow him in your system, we'll see if the Bills can turn it around through the draft. But then moving on to Miami, um, you got your backup quarterback now. What are your thoughts now? Tua goes down with a concussion or an ankle injury or something, wrist injury. And now Zach Wilson comes into the game for the Miami Dolphins. Thoughts now? Because Tua pretty much gets injured every single year and misses some time. So now we're probably going to see Zach Wilson suit up for Miami at some point next season for at least 4 or 5 games.
I love it. I mean, is there anybody that belongs in Miami more than Zach Wilson? I mean, what the fuck was he doing with BYU in college? And what was he doing in New York, of all places? He goes to Miami. Like, that is the ultimate destination for Zach Wilson. Now, unfortunately, Zach Wilson sucks. So he's not very good at football. But at least for where he's going to live and reside, I can see him retiring there, becoming a real estate agent, maybe. Um, but holding the clipboard for Tua while he gets banged up eventually, good for Zach Wilson. He wins. I'm not sure how much it's for, but even if it's for $1 million, I think he's going to have a pretty good life out there.
Some of these have like actual dollar amounts, and some of these just say 1 year deal. Like, okay, I guess it's not that much money. But Miami, I like Zach Wilson to Miami. I think it's going to be interesting, and I like seeing that storyline of him like go to Miami and potentially play there. And he's one of those quarterbacks that would be funny to see him have a little bit of a comeback. But we'll see. And then they also signed Nick Westbrook Akine, new wide receiver for them to go along with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And then they signed offensive lineman Larry Borum. They signed offensive guard James Daniels, linebacker Terrell Dodson, cornerback Afitu Malofu agreed to a deal. Then you also got Elijah Campbell re-signed, and then you got safety Ashton Davis. So You got some good players on the offensive line and then solid defensive pickups for Miami as well. So I feel like overall, strong free agency. You got a backup quarterback that I don't know. At least he's somebody. At least he's not Mike White. At least he's a guy who you've seen play competent football at times for a game or two. And then you also get some safety help and offensive line help as well.
Yeah, they got depth, which is what they needed. Right now, they're super top heavy with Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Tua, and a couple of other players. But at the same time, I don't know. It really depends on, the Patriots have made a lot of moves. The Jets have made a move as well. Like, have they lost their footing as the second best team in that division based on the moves that the Jets and Patriots made? We'll find out.
Yeah, no, we'll find out. But anything else left to say about Miami or strong B plus grade for them?
I'm going to give them like a C. They got
All
depth,
right.
but I don't know how much better they got ultimately.
Yeah, I don't think this like pushed them over the edge by any means. But up next, same division, we have New England here, and then they signed your favorite backup quarterback, not named Jameis Winston, Joshua Dobbs, agreed to not a 1 year deal, a 2 year, $8 million deal with $3.8 million guaranteed. Way to go out there and get your money. Mike Vrabel going out there, getting Josh Dobbs paid a little bit of $3.8 million to get him going in a retirement there, or maybe he'll get a couple more.
I love that signing. I loved it so much. Josh Dobbs, I mean, he had this Linsanity run with the Cardinals, and then, he had a great run with the Titans as well. Everywhere he goes, he balls out. He balled out with the 49ers last year, that last game. He's just a grinder. Everywhere he goes, he balls out. So him going to the Patriots, at least the Patriots know that if Drake May gets banged up, they can plug in Josh Dobbs. You gave him like 4 hours before plugging in when he played for one of the other teams. So
Minnesota.
he's a baller. He's a grinder. Yeah, Minnesota. That's where it was. I liked him better than what they had for Jacoby Brissett. So I love the signing for the Patriots a lot.
Yeah, no, I like Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs seems like throwing is easy for him. It's just some of the times like decisions get in his way where like sometimes with Jacoby Brissett, just him playing quarterback and throwing the ball seems hard at times, and sometimes it feels like he's moving in molasses. Where Josh Dobbs like actually feels like a quarterback and a backup quarterback. So Drake May did get banged up a little bit, so I do think it is important to have a good backup here. And then I'll roll through the rest of the signings. And then we'll give our thoughts on them. But they got wide receiver Mac Hollins. You need help there, so just sign anyone. Resign Austin Hooper. You sign offensive tackle Morgan Moses. You sign edge Harold Landry to a 3 year, $43 million deal. Defensive lineman Milton Williams of the Philadelphia Eagles defensive line, a 4 year, $104 million deal for him. Cha-ching. Spend that money. You got Bob Spillane at linebacker. You got Carlton Davis to go along with Christian Gonzalez. Then you also got defensive lineman Kiris Tonga on a 1 year, $2.7 million deal. Patriots got some beef on defense. I mean, you want to talk about a dynamic corner duo now. You address the interior, you get an offensive tackle, and Mike Vrabel wants to move towards running the football because he saw the effect it had on the league last year. You didn't get a wide receiver, but you did as good as you could at every other position outside of that.
See, I like their moves a lot. Carlton Davis brings that second corner to pair with Christian Gonzalez. You get more pressure on the edge with Milton Williams, and then you get some offensive line help, which you desperately needed. I think they'll still address the offensive line either later in the offseason or in the draft. And the wide receiver position, they got Matt Collins, which I still think is going to be their number one receiver right now. They did try to get Chris Godwin, but he ended up denying them, even though they wanted to pay him $30 million a year. Either that's loyalty or the Patriots just really suck that bad. But I think the Patriots got a lot better. Their defense should be a lot better. Their offense, I think they're still not done. I think Cooper Cup's going to be a Patriot eventually. So I like what they've done a lot so far. I would give them so far. I would give them an A for the offseason.
Yeah, and they're like showing that they're gonna go out there and spend money, and it shows that they care about winning because like this may not be the Super Bowl offense yet next year, but this defense may be the one of the best defenses in the league, especially if you have a healthy Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez. Then adding that pressure on the interior there, like those are some pretty big moves. And then also Bob Spillane, underrated player, good hustle guy, good heart guy for your team. So we got a lot of hot in Boston. So I
Yeah.
feel like it's a good free agency here for them. Any last thoughts on New England, or feel good to move on?
Yeah, I like the Bob Spillane signing a lot. I do like the Mac Hollins signing, and Milton Williams, I think, is going to complement them really well. Great moves by the Patriots, and I'm excited to see what they do next.
All right. And then for the Jets, up next, we're breaking down every signing for the Jets here. We have number one, Justin Fields signing a 2 year, $40 million deal with $30 million guaranteed, including a $15 million signing bonus and a $5 million base in 2025. Then you also signed Jaquana Okafor, offensive tackle, Josh Myers, Jamie Sherwood, linebacker, cornerback Brandon Stevens. You signed safety Andre Cisco, and then safety Isaiah Oliver on that team. But weird, weird free agency for the Jets if I had to sum it up with a word instead of a grade.
Yeah, yeah. I would give their grade a C minus. Justin Fields with the Jets is like it was one of those things. I didn't expect him to go to the Jets, but as soon as he signed with the Jets, I'm like, of course, he went to the Jets. Where else would the Jets be in a desperate situation for a quarterback where Justin Fields is their only option? Because every other quarterback that is in the free agency market, they have burned, whether it's Geno Smith, whether it's Sam Darnold, or whether it's Aaron Rodgers. The only person left on that Infinity Stone is Kirk Cousins, I guess. So Justin Fields is left to die on the cross of East Rutherford, I guess. And then on the other end, Justin Fields, like the Steelers don't want him back. No other team is really desperate enough for Justin Fields except for the Jets. So the Jets are desperate enough. Justin Fields desperate enough. They make a perfect marriage. And I do think that they'll be interesting with Justin Fields, but just like as they were interesting with Chicago, they're not going to do anything. They're still going to suck. They're probably going to be the fourth place team, but we'll have a couple of fun Sports Center moments.
Especially Justin Fields with
That's what
Aaron
I think.
Glenn. This is a nightmare. Like this is going to be a nightmare for the Jets next year. And then are you going to try and draft someone this year and also ruin their career? So like I'm just confused. And then the fact that he went out there, congratulations Justin Fields for getting $30 million guaranteed from an NFL team, like that's crazy money. Like for an NFL quarterback, that's like a solid 2 years, 15 million per year to do what when you're not a starter in the NFL. So like that's pretty impressive for Jalen Hurts. And then you get offensive tackle, like offensive tackle signings are pretty hit or miss depending on the team. And then some defensive players, you signed two safeties and a linebacker there, but I don't know. I'm still iffy on this Jets rebuild here with Aaron Glenn, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I just don't think they got better anywhere. I don't think their quarterback situation's better either. Justin Fields or Aaron Rodgers. Even old Aaron Rodgers is better than current Justin Fields. But you know what? We did see a bit of a renaissance with Justin Fields with Mike Tomlin. He was a competent quarterback. He played relatively well, had a good rushing season as well. So we'll see how it works out. But I am definitely not buying the dip with the Jets right now. I don't think that they're going to make much noise.
Yeah, they're like we don't want to sit with the kid who does drugs on the bus anymore. We don't want to sit with the nerd anymore. Let's get the slow kid instead. Let's try him out. All right, let's see how it works next year. So we'll see, but they'll probably draft someone too. But I don't know. But moving north, we have Baltimore. And the Ravens free agency signing can be summed up pretty easily. They signed DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah.
That's it.
I like it. He's, yeah, it's just, I like him. DeAndre Hopkins is definitely not the player. If this was like 5 years ago, this would be amazing. But they've kind of become the team that signs washed wide receivers. I mean, we have DeAndre Hopkins, and there's a number of other examples I can use, but he still has some tank left, so I still think he's going to be competent. He's already got his ring, so he's happy there, or at least made a Super Bowl, which is happy enough for him. So I don't know. I don't think you're going to get the best of DeAndre Hopkins, but ultimately, you just need him to be a little better than what Odell was for you, and that'll be enough. So good for DeAndre. Gets to play with Lamar and still compete for a Super Bowl. So good for him.
Yeah, he'll be a solid 3-4 rotational guy for them. So I don't know. Maybe you sign like the player who also like now you have probably two of the guys who had the worst drops in the playoffs last year, though, because you have the Mark Andrews drop on the goal line. And then do you remember the DeAndre Hopkins drop from the Super Bowl, where as soon as he dropped that pass, it felt like the game just broke open? There's like one drop turned the entire Super Bowl around. And then one drop cost Lamar a chance to get to the Super Bowl. It's like you have maybe two of the biggest chokers of the playoffs last year on your team now. Like, I don't know. I don't love that.
Yeah, yeah, I don't love it either. Plus, DeAndre, like, he's a guy that should doesn't really need to play any more football. I feel like he's proved everything he needs to prove, and I definitely think he's past his prime. So it's like, what is there to prove at this point? What is there to accomplish? Like, I don't know. He's just going to be like Odell was for Baltimore. He's not going to solve your problems. You still have Zay Flowers and a number of other nice receivers, but he doesn't really. I don't think he makes your receiver room that much greater ultimately.
No, but that is the Ravens offseason. They signed DeAndre Hopkins. Good job, Ravens, because the next team is not doing a very good job. And you know what they do to compensate for it? Let's bring back Samaji P. Ryan. Yeah, the Cincinnati Bengals, they're like, oh, we're having issues with T. Higgins. We're having our entire defense either retire or request a trade. Let's bring back Samaji P. Ryan on a 2-year, $3.8 million deal. We need to do that. And then also, we're going to tag T. Higgins and make our franchise hate us. We're going to make our fans hate us. We're going to make Joe Burrow hate us. We're going to make Jamar Chase hate us. And then we're going to drive away the second, third best player on our team in T. Higgins. And now the best player on your defense is now requesting a trade because he wants to get paid. So it's just a mess right now. And then you re sign Mike Gesicki. Sure, good. That's fine. And then you sign TJ Slayton, you sign Oren Burks at linebacker, and then you sign Cal Adamus. But like the Bengals this offseason, it feels like their entire team is falling apart. I mean, Trey Hendrickson wants a trade, and then Sam Hubbard retires on you.
Yeah, this team, for a team that only 4 years ago was in the Super Bowl, the fact that you have to pay Jamar Chase, the fact that you have to pay T. Higgins, pay Trey Hendrickson, and then the rest of your team defensively is pathetic. I mean, they had the worst defense in football. The reason why they didn't make the playoffs ultimately. And then not one but two of your top receivers need to get paid. Jamar Chase maybe more than T. Higgins, but you need to figure out what to do with T. Higgins because he's been tagged twice now. And ultimately, especially with what his injuries have been over the past 2 years, you're fucking him over hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you're not going to pay him, then fucking trade T. Higgins and stop wasting his time. And then, God forbid, you lose Trey Hendrickson in the offseason, you trade him. Who's on your defense at this point? At this point, you have fucking Pop Warner people on your team at this point. You have third strings on any other team. Your defense is horrendous. You lose Luana Rumo, the defensive coordinator, which is maybe warranted at this point, and your defense is terrible. But you're wasting the prime of Joe Burrow, who is at worst the fourth best quarterback in the league, and at best the second best quarterback in the league. You're ruining this prime. You don't want him to turn into Drew Brees. Pay Jamar Chase, pay T. Higgins, and figure it the fuck out. That is my that is my synopsis.
Yeah, I don't care if you lose T. Higgins, but keep Trey Hendrickson. I mean, you can get by with T. Higgins on your team. Like, okay, you only have one massive nuclear weapon. It can work if you have a defense and you have a run game to go with it, which Cincinnati does, and you definitely can. So it's like you at least have to figure out how to keep Trey Hendrickson. But if you can't pay him either, then something's going to happen in Cincinnati where it's Joe Burrow's either going to leave or just not sign a new deal there because now if him and Jamar Chase are looking at each other like, well, T. Higgins isn't going to be here, Trey Hendrickson isn't going to be here, so it's kind of just going to be you and us putting up 33, 35 points, and we go 8-9, 9-8, and then we make the playoffs once every 4 years. And we're going to make the playoffs two, three, four, maybe five more times, and then go out like the Chargers did.
Yeah, I just think that you're ruining his prime, and ultimately, this is a guy who should be competing in every playoff run. Instead of seeing a team like the Broncos or the Dolphins make the playoffs, we're missing out on seeing Joe Burrow versus Allen, Joe Burrow versus Lamar versus Mahomes. It's hurting the NFL product with the Bengals being as cheap and pathetic as they've been. So they got to fix it. I mean, your biggest move should not be resigning Samaje Perine. He should not be your priority right now. When you have Chase Brown and Zach Moss, your priority is fucking Samaje Perine. Give me a fucking break, dude. Like, you have all these people you have to sign, and you're trying to sign your third running back. Like, figure your shit
He
out.
was a spy. He was a spy last year because he was on Kansas City. So he was in the building for KC last year. Now he's bringing back their secrets to Cincinnati. I guess that's the only reason why it makes sense if he was just there collecting intel on the Chiefs.
Yeah, but you still have to make the playoffs, and it's not going to matter what you do against the Chiefs week fucking 13 of the NFL. Make the fucking playoffs so you can actually beat the Chiefs because you're the only team outside of the Eagles who can beat them at this point, it looks like. So figure like they got to figure their shit out. It's frustrating. Not even as a Bengals fan, just as an NFL fan.
Yeah. And there's another team too that needs to figure it out, pull it together, make the playoffs. Some other players was like, I want to trade. And they're like, all right, well, how about $123 million and a 40 million per year salary? And he said, never mind all of that winning stuff. What did you say about that? Miles Garrett comes back to the Cleveland Browns, has an agreement with them, and he says, if you bring in a Super Bowl winning quarterback, I will be your edge rusher next year if you pay me $40 million a year, $123 million guaranteed. I'll come back. It's all right. Not seeking a trade anymore. And they're like, we brought in a Super Bowl quarterback. It's okay. We already have the trade in place. We're trading DTR for him. And then they bring in Kenny Pickett, who won a Super Bowl last year, and finally get rid of DTR. They finally get him out of the building so we can say we have a Super Bowl winning quarterback on the roster now. And DTR is gone. He's out of the building. It's over. It's finally over. He's not going to play anymore. No more weird experiments for Cleveland playing DTR. We can relax.
See, I think he hoped, and I hope they still do this, that them trading for a Super Bowl quarterback would have meant like Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, something like that would have maybe helped. But no, they go after Kenny Pickett, who could hold the clipboard for Jalen Hurts pretty well. And now he might actually just be starting in Cleveland at this point because Deshaun Watson is basically dead at this point. He is essentially the zombified corpse that is just essentially getting a paycheck from Cleveland, essentially bankrupting the city of Cleveland, which is honestly sinister, if I do say so myself. Getting Kenny Pickett is great, but they still like, can they get Russell Wilson? Can they get, even though this would be the most hideous jersey, Aaron Rodgers? Hell, get Kirk Cousins there. Like, I don't know. I'm glad Miles Garrett got the bag, but let's get a quarterback. Let's get receivers. Let's get this going. You guys have a good defense. Let's not fuck this up. Like, you're not that far. You're probably closer at this point than the Bengals to competing at this point. Just get a quarterback and a couple of weapons, and you're fine.
Yeah, don't worry. We're going to go out there and get Shador. It's all right. Cleveland will be okay. Don't you worry. Cleveland always figures it out.
Yeah, that is what they're known for. Figuring
Yeah,
it out, especially at
figuring
quarterback.
pierogies and figuring it out. That's what Cleveland's known for. But they go out there. Have a couple of other signings here, like Joe Tyron, Sharinka, Malik Collins, and this is just a move that you simulate Madden 10 years in the future and like, oh, that makes sense that Devin Bush ended up on the Browns in 2025 when you simulate forward from Madden 17 and be like, what's the NFL going to be like in 8 years? Like, oh, Devin Bush on the Browns when he's 35 years old. Makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Good for the Browns. Good for Devin Bush. Happy for him. Hope it's a great marriage.
But the
Good for
Steelers
the Browns.
had a free agency as well, and they signed Kenneth Gainwell at running back, trade for DK Metcalf for a second round pick, and a late round pick swap. DK Metcalf is signing a $132 million extension with Pittsburgh per Tom Pelissero. Then he also signed tight end Donald Parham, defensive lineman Malik Harrison, and then cornerbacks Brandon Eccles, and they decided Darius Slay, you just won a Super Bowl and probably had the best last year of your prime. Let's bring in another washed corner because that's what Pittsburgh does now.
Yeah, I mean, R.I.P. Pat Peterson. He's probably gone if he's not already.
Joe
They get
Hayden.
Darius Slay. They get DK, which should make their receivers a little bit better. Kenneth Gainwell. I mean, they lose Najee. They replace him with Kenneth Gainwell. Probably a little bit worse at running back now, but uh, I still think they're the exact same team that they were a couple of months ago when they lost in the playoffs. Like they're still going to be 9-8, 10-7. They're good enough that they have a decent enough defense. They can make moves, and they're a just competent enough offense that they can be 9-8. So they haven't moved the needle. I'll give them a C plus because at least they traded for a top receiver. But yeah, they haven't done. Well, they're still the same team.
I feel like top target for them in the draft has to be find the best running back you can for Pittsburgh. It feels like that's like the
Hmm.
position that they're weakest at right now outside of quarterback. So like if you could find someone who potentially has CTE at 23 years old before he even gets drafted into the NFL who played at ASU, that could be interesting.
I was gonna say, there is a running back in the draft that I've come to like quite a lot. A guy that probably does have CTE, especially after the Texas game. I mean, good lord, that man carried him on his back, shoulders, and fucking thighs. Perhaps maybe a Cam Scatterbo wouldn't hurt in Pittsburgh. Who knows? I'm sure he'll be happy to play in Pittsburgh. They have a
Yeah.
series of historic running backs as well. I don't know. I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, we'll see. But I feel like quarterback and running back, that's what they need to figure out here for Pittsburgh. But any last thoughts on Pittsburgh's free agency so far? Feel good to move on to the South.
Let's go to the South.
Transitioning all the way to the East Coast down in Texas. We have the Houston, Texas. And they went out there and they signed Braxton Berrios and they acquired biggest breaking news. Christian Kirk was acquired with a trade in the Jaguars in exchange for a 2026 seventh round pick. What? You're just giving away your number one wide receiver. Well, you have BTJ now, but they said, you know what? We have Brian Thompson Jr. Christian Kirk was injured last year. We paid him a bunch of money. It makes sense for Houston right now. So we're just going to swap him for a seventh round pick and get nothing back for him. You served your purpose. You're out. You're gone. That's it.
Yeah, I love this move I mean, they made a similar move last year when they got Joe Mixon for a seventh round pick. They were going to cut Christian Kirk anyways. They're like, why not just secure the fact that we're going to get him? So they go out and get him, and I love it. I think it's a great move for Christian Kirk. It's a great move for Houston. Um, I don't know if he'll be their top receiver, but I think he's always been like a consistently solid receiver. I would say like I could compare him a little bit to Tyler Lockett in his prime. Um, just consistent number two guy. You can rely on him to get like 4 catches for 50 yards. Um, so he's going to be a great fit for Houston. I think CJ Stroud's going to really like having him there. especially if they ultimately decide that they don't want to keep Stephon Diggs. He'll be a guy that complements that game really well. So great. I love that move a lot for Houston. Super underrated.
Yeah, and I feel like Christian Kirk in the long term could be cheaper than Stephon Diggs, and also maybe just have a little bit more left in the tank. And I feel like he's a really good complement to Nico Collins because Nico Collins is big and physical. Christian Kirk is a physical receiver, but he's a little smaller and he's fast as well. And then you have Tank Dell as well. You got some depth at wide receiver here, and then the other breaking news that you trade for CJ Gardner Johnson for a sixth-round pick with the Philadelphia Eagles in exchange for offensive guard Kenyon Green and a 2026 fifth round pick. So not only do you acquire Christian Kirk for a late round pick, you also get CJ Gardner Johnson for a late round pick, offensive guard, and then a 2026 fifth round pick as well. So he's someone who helps solidify your secondary as well versus Kansas City. And Houston gave the Chiefs a really good run for their money. And I feel like what they showed me last season is yeah, we may struggle in the regular season. We may have some bad games and look like we're bad at some point, but when it comes to the playoffs and showing up when it really matters, like we'll actually come out there and show up in the playoffs when it matters. And they gave the Kansas City Chiefs one of the toughest runs for their money we've seen in the divisional round. So I could see this Houston Texans team with a potentially weaker Buffalo next year, weaker Baltimore with injuries and just getting older, and Cincinnati kind of just like not really being able to do anything unless they have a exceptional draft this year. Like this could actually be Houston's year next year to make it to the conference championship.
I would agree. I think they have a great running back. They have nice receivers there as well. It's really the biggest hole is going to be their offensive line. I know they traded away Laramie Tunsil, which is going to affect their offensive line, but it looks like they're starting to just essentially do a full rebuild. You mentioned that they got some offensive line talent in the trade as well. So if they can fix their offensive line, which was one of the worst in the league last year, I think their defense has been shown to be good enough, especially with Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter. So they're not that far from being the biggest threat to the Chiefs. So ultimately, if they could just get the offensive line right, I like what they're doing.
Yeah, another thing that's interesting too is as you go down the list, like they sign Braxton Berrios on this team. You sign a wide receiver like Justin Watson. So you go out there and you get two wide receivers that are just rotational guys for depth that CJ Stroud will be able to build rapport with because last season you just got like decimated with injuries. It was literally just Joe Mixon and Nico Collins, and that was it. And that's been the story back to back seasons. So like we actually need to go out there and get depth. Then you get Laken Tomlinson, and then um, Terrell Taylor is an edge rusher, agreed to a contract there. You got Sheldon Rankins on the defensive line as well. That was one of the other big signings that was kind of eye popping for me when you see him and CJ Gardner Johnson, and then all the players you re sign. Then you also have linebacker Nick Neiman signing a 2 year deal, and then kick returner and cornerback Tremont Smith. So, like, you also get some other really good depth signings at wide receiver and then also on the defensive line and safety as well. So like Houston back to back years has come out and I feel like had strong attempts at an offseason where at least you can see the effort there where they're trying to win.
Yeah, and I think last year you mentioned a lot of injuries, and I think part of that the NFL has a lot of luck. There's a lot of lucky breaks that play a part, and last year I think they had a lot of bad breaks, but they still won their division. I still think that they have a great defense. They have a great young quarterback in CJ Stroud, who we can expect to hit his third year stride as well. I think the Texans are one of those teams that is one of the most under the radar great teams approaching us, especially if they can get their offensive line, like I mentioned, and they continue to make aggressive moves like they are, then they're going to be in the conference championship. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, so really impressed with Houston. I give them an A plus. You pretty much did everything you can. Then the draft, you're pretty much going to go out there, draft a new offensive line. So that's going to be the biggest gamble is if you'll have that offensive line to pay off for you. But in your division, also helping out the the Houston Texans this year is the Indianapolis Colts. Daniel Jones officially agrees to make the Colts have the worst quarterback room in NFL history. They had the two worst QBRs last season. They were the number 31 and 32 quarterback of everyone qualified for that statistic. Your thoughts on Daniel Jones making the Colts quarterback room the worst in NFL history, potentially?
I think it's a dark day for the city of Indianapolis, and I would check on Patrick McAfee of Indianapolis, and really check on his ultimate well-being. What's going on with Chuck Pagano? What's going on with Andrew Luck? What's going on with the owner Jim Irsay? We don't know, because this day is almost as tragic as Pearl Harbor, as 9/11, Benghazi. Insert significantly tragic moments. I mean, this is the time that your team signed Daniel Jones to play football for your team, a mistake that only two other teams can ultimately say. And the Vikings, maybe there's more wiggle room. I'll leave the Vikings alone in that case. The Giants drafted him, so they're the biggest loser, as they usually are. But then they have an opportunity where Daniel Jones has an opportunity to retire, become a real estate agent or an insurance salesman, go play somewhere else, maybe the XFL or Canada. And you're the reason why he's still in the NFL because of your front office. Chris Ballard, at it again. This is a very dark time for the Indianapolis Colts fans, a team that drastically underperformed last year. And now the way that they recuperate is by signing arguably the worst quarterback in the NFL last season to compete with the other terrible quarterback in Anthony Richardson. You go from black Daniel Jones to white Daniel Jones. So what's next? Are we going to have Asian Daniel Jones? What's next? We don't know.
Yeah, no. I mean, Daniel Jones turned around the locker room and saw his shadow. And, we really couldn't tell them apart, especially when you look at the stats, you look at the QBR, there's no real difference. You know, it's what matters. What's on the inside that counts. It's the stats that count how you perform. And, the Colts went out there and they made calls for Anthony Richardson. And this is like, I don't know. They signed Daniel Jones, but it still feels like the same level of Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis, even if you just signed Daniel Jones. It's like they didn't give anything up for him, but it still feels like they gave up Luka for AD. Especially you're gonna like give up all the excuses why you signed him, and like him and Anthony Richardson have the exact same issues, and Anthony Richardson does what Daniel Jones does well, way better than Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I can honestly agree. I think Daniel Jones is maybe more mature, but Anthony Richardson, like, he can run the football better. Granted, Daniel Jones can complete like 50% of his throws, something that Anthony Richardson cannot. But they both, let's just be honest, they both just aren't good quarterbacks. So if they can't bring back Joe Flacco because he's literally, I don't know, collecting social security checks at this point, then what are you going to do? Like, I feel like Joe Flacco ultimately bailed you out last season for how good you ultimately were, but he's not gonna. It's not banking on Joe Flacco coming back next season and saving your city. Like, no, you're screwed. You have two of the worst quarterbacks outside of. I mean, I don't know, maybe the Jets, but even the Jets, I think, are in a better spot. Like, you're kind of screwed at this point. So good for the
Yeah.
Colts. They have tanked their season. They will be drafting first next year.
Yeah, so we'll see if they go out there and get another Manning next year. It'll be interesting to see. But we also have the Jacksonville Jaguars, who seemingly every year the Jaguars go out there and find a way to sign every single player that no one knew was a free agent. So we have that. Starting off that list is Nick Mullins signing a 2-year deal, probably the only player that
Mhm.
people will know. Then we have De'Ami Brown signing a 1-year deal. Hunter
Nice.
Long, tight end. Jonathan Munt agrees to a deal. Offensive tackle Chuma Idoga. Offensive tackle Robert Hainsey. Offensive guard Patrick McCurry. Jordan Lewis, cornerback. And then safety Eric Murray. Congratulations, Jaguars. You did it again. Another successful list that no one knows. But what it does tell me is you went out there, you get two offensive tackles, you spend a lot of money on the offensive line here, is picking up two. And then you also go out there, sign two tight ends. So what this tells me early on is we're trying to protect Trevor Lawrence. Three offensive linemen, two tight ends that aren't known for catching.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope they would protect Trevor Lawrence at this point. Uh, but yeah, you were right. I mean, I didn't believe you at first, but they literally just signed like the most random. You know what it reminds me of? If we're making Madden comparisons, like there's like 4 weeks of Madden off season that you can sign free agents. It's like you're on the last week of the off season, and the top free agents available are De'Ami Brown and those two tight ends you mentioned, and the offensive linemen. They just went out inside the fourth week of the off season players. The problem is that it was week one of the offseason, so they didn't have to do that. They could have gone out and signed somebody. But good job, Jags. Maybe you'll win 6 games next year. So moving upwards, I suppose.
Duval. We'll see how that works out for y'all. And then in the y'all city itself, we have Nashville, Tennessee. They go out there and spend a lot of money, 2.5 million, 1 year deal for Van Jefferson. Sign offensive tackle Dan Moore Jr., offensive guard Kevin Zeter. You have Sebastian Joseph Day re-signing. You agree to a deal with linebacker Cody Barton, and then you also sign safety Morgan Cox, who's re-signing with you, and then you sign Johnny Hecker, who's probably the biggest name on that list. Actually, is Johnny Hecker, the punter.
I was going to say, Johnny Hicker's a great punter. They'll be punting a lot next year. So, yeah, I mean, this is a team that they're in full rebuild. They're not going to go out and sign a bunch of players. They're not quite ready to compete. So it is what it is. But now they have a good punter that can help their defense out a little bit as they go after either it's going to be Cam Ward or Shador Sanders. But yeah, I don't know. Not a lot of eye breaking moves there for me.
Yeah, and then one of the strongest free agencies I feel like of any team, one team whose defense got tremendously better. I feel like this free agency. We have the Broncos. They go out there and sign quarterback Jarrett Stidham. Trent Sherfield Jr. agrees to a 2 year deal, so getting some speed there. You sign Evan Ingram to a 2 year, $20 million deal. He gets 16 million guaranteed. Offensive tackle Matt Pert. You get nose tackle DJ Jones, linebacker Dre Greenlaw, linebacker Justin
Oh.
Strad, and then safety Talanono Hufunga from San Francisco, and then also Mitchell Fraboni. Like defensively, I feel like this was really strong that they went out there, got two really good players from the San Francisco 49ers in Hufunga, and then Trey Greenlaw, who's been a really good player for San Francisco. Starting to see San Fran slowly lose some of these pieces here, but I feel like that, and then going out there, getting Evan Ingram and Trent Sherfield Jr., some pretty good pieces for Denver. I feel like this is a strong lineup.
Yeah, I think the Broncos got better. Their defense got better with Trey Greenlaw and Ufunga. And then getting Evan Ingram, I think, is a super underrated signing because I felt like their biggest weakness the last decade has been tight end offensively. You get Evan Ingram, who I do definitely think is an underrated tight end. I like that signing a lot. It's a low risk, high reward sort of signing. And then you get Trent Sherfield, who I don't think is like a amazing receiver, but I think that he's one of these guys that as your fourth option is going to be excellent. You still have Cortland Sutton. I think they're still in play for someone like Cooper Cup, who is now a free agent. So the Broncos, they got better. I think their defense, which was already the best defense in football at points, just got better. And then I also think their offense got better with the additions that they made. Although them being small moves, I think they're moves that give them a certain amount of depth. So bravo to the Broncos. I think they'll still be in the playoffs next year potentially.
Yeah, I got to draft a receiver for sure, but I like this defensive pickup. So interested to see what Denver does next year. And then underwhelming offseason, some say, for Kansas City. Some people worried about the Kansas City Chiefs, but they go out there, sign running back Elijah Mitchell, re sign Marquise Brown, sign offensive tackle Jalen Moore, sign offensive guard Trey Smith. They re sign Nick Bolton. They get Christian Fulton. They get Matt Ariza tendered by the team, exclusive rights to punt there for $960,000. Okay, and then they sign James Winchester as well. So they kind of lost a lot of pieces, though. You lose an important piece on your offensive line for Kansas City. DeAndre Hopkins walks out the door there. You also lose Justin Reed to New Orleans as well. So kind of a so offseason for Kansas City, but I feel like they usually pick up players in the draft. And then also Rasheed Rice will be back next year, so that will pick up some of the slack on offense. I feel like that they've experienced.
Yeah, I think they're one of those teams that don't have a lot of holes. So them addressing needs in the offseason via free agency is probably not their forte. Um, that being said, you mentioned all the guys they lost. I think in the draft, the last 3 or 4 years is what's made the Chiefs the dynasty ultimately, with how successful they've been. Do I see them potentially taking a step back next year because of it? Yes, I still think that they should be winning that division pretty handedly. Um, but it hurts. I do like the Elijah Mitchell signing, though. I think that pairing him with Pacheco, he's an underrated running back, and they probably got him for a good deal. So I think he could end up doing well for them, especially if Pacheco loses time again. That's an underrated signing for me.
Yeah, we'll say. And for me, like, I don't have a problem with this offseason. I agree with you. Like, they've really been built through the draft. So I think Kansas City will be fine here, especially Rasheed Rice coming back here. Um, Yeah, I think Kansas City will be fine. But some players who won't be fine, some people woke up and decided, you know what, let me sign with Las Vegas. That sounds like a good idea. But they also went out there and acquired Geno Smith in a trade for a third round pick, which is more than was given up for Christian Kirk, which I find odd here. And then Alex Kappa wakes up and decides to choose and sign with Vegas. Max Crosby signs a 3-year extension, who temporarily made him the highest paid player at his position. And then you also sign Jeremy Chin and then safety Isaiah Polome here. And then Landon Roberts at
See,
linebacker. So,
yeah, I mean, I would punish these players for the dumb decision that they just made, but their punishment is living in Las Vegas. As somebody who had just been to Las Vegas, and we'll talk about that after these signings, the punishment is that they have to live in Nevada and they have to live in the city of Las Vegas, at least to some extent, at certain points during the year. Um, but ultimately, I mean, they got their quarterback, Geno Smith, which I think is an upgrade from Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And then they made a couple of minor signings there as well. I think they got better, but at the same time, they need to get weapons. They need to get a better offensive line, and they need to address the defense as well. So I don't think that they're going to be competing anytime soon. But I think Geno Smith, getting him, he's a solid quarterback, but he's not excellent. So in the short term, he will patch up some of the problems with the offense, and at least make you guys a little bit more competitive, but not too much.
yeah, so we'll see what goes on with the Raiders, but long decade term game for them. But team that's not as much the long game for and has already signed their quarterback and paid them money. Los Angeles Chargers. So the Chargers scoop up Najee Harris. He's gone. He's finally gone from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had a consistent 1,000 yard season each year in the NFL, solid 5 to 8 touchdowns for them. But he agreed to a 1-year deal with only $5.25 million guaranteed for Najee Harris. Then you also go out there, and as far as players, new players that you signed, you get Dante Jackson, cornerback. You get cornerback Elijah Molden, and then you also go out there and then re-sign J.K. Scott. So not too much action so far from them, but you go out there, get a corner, and then you address your running back position where maybe J.K. Dobbins isn't the answer, or we should have a solid 1-2 punch to go along with J.K. Dobbins. And if you still have him on your team, I feel like him and Najee Harris are a good duo where they both complement each other well.
I can agree. I think they're moving on from Gus Edwards. I think they improved their running game. Najee is one of those guys that part of him, I think maybe an inefficient running back, but I also think that part of that has to do with the way the Steelers run their offense. I think in LA, I do think he's going to have a better season than what we've seen out of him so far. Another signing that was previous to this, they signed Mike Williams. He's coming back for $6 million. I see that as a headline here. So Their offense got better. I think Najee is a nice addition, better than Gus Edwards, and they get Mike Williams, which helps their wide receiver core. So maybe they're in on Cooper Cup, maybe they're not, but their offense, at least to some extent, I think got better, and their defense played well last year.
Yeah, I feel like you definitely draft for your offense this year. If you're the Chargers, you went out there, you got Lad McConkey. You don't have too many massive holes. You're probably going out there and looking for another edge rusher, but it's probably going to be a draft heavy rebuild for the Chargers here over the next few years.
Yeah, you're probably right.
But that shifts us from the AFC into the NFC, starting with America's team city, where a lot of drama is going on in the sports world. But we have the Dallas Cowboys, and then they agreed to sign Javonte Williams to a 1 year, $3 million deal, running back for those of you who don't know him. Then you also sign offensive guard Robert Jones, Peyton Turner, edge rusher. Then you also go out there and agree to sign Solomon Thomas, and you acquire Kenneth Murray, linebacker in a trade, cornerback Kadir Alem. Then you also re-sign some other players on your team, but really, outside of going out there and getting Javante Williams, didn't do too much. Not a eventful offseason for Dallas, but that's not something we really expect. But you did let go of Rico Dotto, which was weird.
Yeah, they let Rico Dordal walk. They bring in Javante Williams, who was one of those guys that I felt like was a really solid running back his first year, and then injuries hurt his second year, and he hasn't really been the same running back since. This could be like a, I feel like it's a high risk, low reward sort of thing, or maybe a low risk, low reward. I don't know. Um, I like him as a player. I think he could be solid for the Cowboys, but was he better than Rico Doidle? I don't think so. And then other than that, the Cowboys have not spent more than $10 million on a free agent since 2015. They have not shelled out cash for a free agent since Greg Hardy in 2015. So this Cowboys team perpetually just doesn't do anything in free agency, even though they have the biggest wallets of anybody in the NFL. So it's like it'd be like if the Yankees spent money like the Florida Marlins. And for people who watch baseball, you get the reference. If not, you can probably piece things together. But this team is the most wealthiest team in all of sports, arguably, and they're going out here signing, the Javante Williams of the world, and everybody else you mentioned for pennies on the dollar. This team has no business doing that. They could go out there, they could sign Cooper Cup if they wanted to. They could sign hell even Najee Harris they could have afforded to sign. But instead, they're just making all of these small, low value deals, which is just going to make the Cowboys the same team that they've been the last 30 years, which is perpetually either 8-8, making the playoffs and choking in the playoffs, or as disappointing as they were last year, which was doing absolutely nothing and being pathetic all season.
Yeah, because you look at another team in your division, like the Giants here. Like the Giants, like while they're not good and they haven't been as good as Dallas, they at least go out there and spend money and try a little bit. Like they go out there, they sign safety Javon Holland, who is one of my top free agents this year. Um, and he agrees to a 3 year, $43 million deal. They go out there, they sign Paulson Adebo. You need a cornerback for a $53 million contract for 3 years here. They went out there, they got Bobby Okereke, they got Brian Burns, they got like a pass rusher, and they had like a really solid defense at times here. And then you're Dallas, and you just sit back and you don't spend any money at all. Like you're not gonna win.
You're not going to win. You're falling behind the Commanders. Hell, even the Giants. If the Giants can go out there and get a quarterback, whether in the draft or even if it's like an Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, I still think those guys are competent enough to perform relatively well at this age. And then you have obviously the Eagles, the defending champions. It's like you potentially could be the worst team in that division. I do think the Giants are pretty far away from contending, but with the right moves this offseason, they could potentially surpass the Cowboys, especially with Dak coming off of a serious injury, another year of wear and tear with CD Lamb, and then a defense that has Trayvon Diggs coming off of an injury. You have everybody else on that entire team, Deron Bland coming off of an injury. Like this Cowboys team might have to just blow up to rebuild if they even want to do that at this point.
Yeah, and it comes down to we'll see in the draft this year for Dallas again this year. So sometimes you get lucky, but that's all right. So the Dallas and then the Giants, like we mentioned some of the players they signed. Like we just need to see what quarterback they get. I feel like that's another team. We'll rely on the draft. And then Philadelphia, they trade for DTR and thank God because that means DTR isn't gonna play unless Jalen Hurts gets hurt. And it's not going to be an experience like, oh, let's see if DTR is good enough to start. It's like, finally, like, no, DTR is not a starter. We're not going to use him in the NFL. And if the plan is to replace Jalen Hurts with DTR, like no, like that's not the plan. So I feel like this is great news for the NFL that DTR is not going to be playing. And then you re-sign Saquon Barkley, you sign AJ Dillon, which I feel like is a super underrated pickup because you have Saquon Barkley come at you. AJ Dillon's a physical, big running back. You go from Saquon Barkley tearing you up to getting farmed with AJ Dillon when he comes on the field. And then you go out there and acquire Kenyon Green in a trade for CJ Gardner Johnson from the Houston Texans. So overall, feels like the Philadelphia Eagles did the NFL world a service, and you got AJ Dillon.
Yeah, I think AJ Dillon's super underrated. He was hurt all of last year with a neck injury, I believe. And so getting him for a value deal, he's a guy that he, unlike with, the Steelers getting George Pickens and DK Metcalf, these running backs complement each other well. You have Saquon, obviously, he's a physical freak himself. And then AJ Dillon, more of like a physical goal line guy. So he could be a guy that could potentially be underrated when it comes to fantasy, especially with his goal line tendencies. So could be really fascinating. Good value. Eagles don't have a lot of things to improve upon, um, but I think that they made some nice moves with ultimately what they can afford to do. So credit to them. Credit to them paying Saquon Barkley as well, doing him well. So I like what they've done ultimately, even with the losses they might have had.
Yeah, no, I think this is a solid free agency for Philadelphia. It really, their Super Bowl next year relies on what they do in the draft at wide receiver and what's going on with AJ Brown right now, and if he's going to be showing up for you next year. But overall, I feel like it was a pretty interesting offseason and free agency for Philadelphia. And then we move over to Washington. And Washington acquired Debo Samuel in a trade, which we covered last week. You also get offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil, which Micah Parsons replied to, "What the fuck?" Because now he has to go up against him twice a year. Then you also sign Jonathan Jones, corner from the Patriots. You sign edge rusher Dietrich Wise. You go out there and you get Javon Kinlaw. You re-sign Babby Wagner. You get safety Will Harris. And then you also re-sign your punter and your kicker. Again, adding some really solid pieces on the defensive side of the ball for Washington. Then you go out there, you fix your problem at offensive tackle. You need some more help, I feel like, at wide receiver, but you still have Debo and Terry McLaurin. So, like, an electric running back could really set this team over the top in the draft this year, especially defensively. I feel like this was a strong free agency for them.
Absolutely. Their defense got a lot better, which I felt like was what hindered them against the Eagles this past NFC Championship game. You added Debo, so you addressed your wide receiver needs as well. And then you still have some decent running backs, but I think that's going to be their main concern this NFL draft. And maybe there's someone like a Cam Scatabo available for them in the second round. We don't know. Um, and then obviously Laramie Tunsil. I mean, he's an older offensive tackle, but he's still very much in his prime. You add him to that offensive line should immediately get better. I just like that they're going all in. Just like what we saw with the Texans a couple of years ago with CJ Stroud. They're going all in while they can instead of waiting. They're not making an example of like what the Bengals have done. They're going in, they have their quarterback. Let's go out and get the most amount of talent we possibly can because that team wasn't that far away from making the Super Bowl in year one. Think about what they can do if they go out and get these players and they can end up making a difference for them. I think the Commanders are in a position where they could surpass the Eagles this upcoming year, win their division, and potentially make a Super Bowl run if they do things right.
Yeah, no, we'll see with Washington, but I feel like really strong defensively, and I feel like you were pretty close to be in that game if you can clean up the turnovers. That's really the issue you had there for Washington, but you need to clean up the fumble issues you had last year. And then Debo Samuel should help with that going out there having another strong draft. So this is strong free agency for the Commanders. Moving to the north in the NFC, you want to talk about a guy who just you know, went into his fridge, had a great morning workout, has his coffee going, all the vibes are there. It's a sunny day out. The oil is frying in a pan, and you just want to let this man cook because the Bears GM goes out there. He signs a tight end, Durham Smythe. He acquires offensive guard Jonah Jackson in a trade. He acquires Joe Tooney in a trade. He goes out there and signs center Drew Dahlman. You get Edge Dario Audabo. You get Grady Jarrett at defensive tackle. And then you go out there, re sign both of your linebackers and your safety on this team. Like, he went out there and got three offensive linemen. And then he got one of the best defensive tackles available in free agency this year. Like, this man went out there and cooked. Like, now you just need to address your tackles in the draft and go out there, get a really solid running back for this team, and then just keep Caleb Williams upright. Like, for the Bears, like, it feels like these are some really strong foundational moves, especially when they're going out there and aggressively trying to improve on defense still and the offensive line.
Yeah, this was a great move all around. They basically traded for their offensive line ultimately. Joe Tooney is a great offensive lineman, and then Jonah Jackson, great addition for them as well. Um, they needed to make this move. They did. Their offensive line was pathetic last year. Caleb Williams couldn't be held upright whatsoever. Part of it being his fault as well. Um, but you have the offensive talent there. You have a formidable running back with DeAndre Swift. You have good receivers, obviously, with DJ Moore there as well. So I think if they can go out there, maybe get another receiver, and then defensively, I feel like they have a lot of talent there. Jalen Johnson, excellent for them. They have Jacoby Brisker here as well, and then Montez Sweat was excellent for them last year. So they have the talent on both sides of the ball. You have the right coach now, hopefully. So get a running back, maybe get another receiver, and this team is going to be contending for the division at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong free agency pickup. So interested to see what the Bears do, but this is a great start for them. Moving on to their foe, the Lions. We have them re-sign Marcus Davenport. You get defensive tackle Roy Lopez signing to a one-year deal. Defensive lineman Lekai Oakers re-signing there, and then you sign Derek Barnes and DJ Reed to replace Carlton Davis. So you kind of lost Carlton Davis, but DJ Reed, not a terrible um, defensive back and corner to replace him with.
Yeah, I think Roy Lopez is an underrated signing for them. Gets a little bit more pressure that you compare with Aleem McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson on the D line. Um, but other than that, it seems like you're just bringing back some players that are already in your system, that already know your system well. Um, so I can't hate it. I like Derek Barnes a lot, and I'm glad he gets paid. So they're small moves for the Lions, but I think they're ultimately in a position where both sides of the ball have talent. So it's really going to come down to the draft for them. Are they going to be able to hit on their picks again? Um, but ultimately, I think they're in a good spot to still contend. Ultimately,
Yeah, I think they're still in a good spot to contend. So I think this is some interesting pickups here. But you go out there, you replace your corner you lost, sign another one, do the best you can there. So overall, solid for the Lions. You've been really strong in the draft here, so you don't need to go crazy in free agency. Same team never really goes crazy in free agency, but always is a contender in the playoffs. The Packers. You sign Aaron Banks to a $77 million deal, so you get a nice pickup on the offensive line at guard. And then, as far as a new player on your team, you get cornerback Nate Hobbs, 4 year, $48 million deal with $16 million guaranteed. So, solid pickup at corner for you when you're potentially going to be moving on from Jair pretty soon here.
yeah. Surprising. Packers don't normally spend money in free agency, so it is refreshing to see they get some offensive line help. they go out and get another corner. Like it's good for to see a team that historically doesn't go out and make these signings to go out and do it, especially when you have the Bears making a bunch of moves, the Lions in recent years making big moves, and then we haven't gone over them yet, but the Vikings have made some big signings this offseason. It's good to see that they're starting to make some moves as well. Because even if their season's super successful, they still could end up being, in this case, they were the 3 seed in that division. They could potentially be the fourth just based on how stacked that division is. So they know they have to be competitive. So, like it for the Packers. We'll see how both of them pan out.
Yeah, so overall, solid for the Packers, not too much more there. And then we move on to maybe the best uniforms in the NFL. The Minnesota Vikings go out there, you re sign Aaron Jones, you get him locked up to a 2 year, um, $13 million deal. So I think that's definitely important for you. Then you agree to a 5 year, $88 million deal. Congratulations to offensive guard Will Fries for getting an absolute bag there. Then you sign center Ryan Kelly, defensive tackle Jonathan Allen, defensive tackle Javon Hargrave out there in Minnesota. And then you still re sign Byron Murphy. You sign cornerback Isaiah Rogers. Tavari Thomas also corner signs with you. You sign safety Theo Thomas. Harrison Smith also returns for you. So, like, for a team that still has your defensive coordinator and your weakness was offensive line last year, where you go out there, you get two really solid pieces, you go out there and you sign a 5 year $88 million deal for Will Fries. Like, okay, it's like Minnesota's going out there and then you're making moves defensively too. Like, this defense, like, that was part of their strength last year's their defense would kind of kick into gear, give their offense some of those layups. So if you're going to be committing next year to a young quarterback, it's like you still have a ton of weapons there. You have a great defense and a good run game. So it's like you're setting up a quarterback who maybe might not be the best in the world, at least for some success early on, where maybe he's not the best in the world, but maybe he's not going to be a complete failure like Zach Wilson was in New York.
Yeah, I think they're in a great spot. Their defense was already solid last year, a top 10 defense. Ultimately, you get Javon Hargrave, which I think complements them well. And I've liked all their moves they've made to this point. Now, the only thing they need to do now is complete the Brett Favre cycle. They need to sign Aaron Rodgers. They need to make it to an NFC title game, and it needs to end on an Aaron Rodgers interception. That is all that the NFL sports world needs. The Vikings, I will give them my blessing. If they need to win the division, if they need to beat the Lions or any of the other teams in the NFC to do it, I don't care. The last thing that we need is Aaron Rodgers signing with the Vikings, making it to an NFC title game, and throwing the end of the game interception. And then the Brett Favre cycle has been complete, and we can wait another 15 years before Jordan Love does the same.
Yeah, can he throw the game like ending interception against the Lions too? For
Yeah,
them to go to the Super Bowl. That'd be great.
probably.
But yeah, no, I want to see the arc completed, and I feel like a lot of people in the NFL world want to see that arc completed. So shout out to the Vikings. Let's see what they do with JJ McCarthy next year and in the draft. And then we move down south from the north. We get a little bit warmer here. We start with Atlanta. Not too much activity here. They re-sign underrated wide receiver Cardell Hodge, I guess. Offensive tackle Jake Matthews. Edge rusher, they signed Leonard Floyd, Divine Deblo, and then they also get safety Liam Colo. He signs a 4 year extension as well. So, not really anything to go over for Atlanta. Kind of just some re signs for them. You get Leonard Floyd, who's already there with their head coach.
Yeah. My only comment is how many teams has Leonard Floyd played for at this point? I feel like he's played for a million. I can just see looking him up that he's played for the Bears, like this is be his fifth team at this point. That's really my only comment. Otherwise, like the Falcons are the exact same as they were before free agency. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but maybe bad. I don't know. I would say
Yeah,
they're exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly the same. So we move on to Carolina, and notable resign. They resign Andy Dalton, another notable important resigning for them. They brought back Tommy Tremble. We are a tight end podcast, tight end show. So another tight end comes back and he re-signed a 2-year deal worth up to $16 million. So pretty solid money for him. And then Rico Dowdle, who was kind of the Cowboys' offense last year, at the end of it, agrees to a 1-year, $6.25 million deal. And then you go out there, you sign edge rusher Patrick Jones, defensive lineman Tershawn Wharton, and then you re-sign J.C. Horn, and he resets the corner market there on a 4-year extension worth $70 million guaranteed for $100 million. So really, the news out of Carolina is a lot of these other teams who have better corners from that draft, like the Jets with Sauce Gardner, the Broncos, kind of screwed over the entire market now. Now people are going to be expecting 4 years, $70 million for a corner. How crazy is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think J.C. Horn is a nice corner. He's a top 10 corner in the league, maybe a little bit higher. Um, so I don't hate them re-signing him. I also think that the Rico Dodal signing's a nice signing. Um, he was ultra efficient for the Cowboys last year. Panthers got a little bit better. I do like them bringing back Andy Dalton. But yeah, I mean, Sauce Gardner should be thanking J.C. Horn. Pat Sertan, if he hasn't already been paid yet, they should be thanking him as well. Um, the list goes on. Um, Trayvon Diggs, if he hasn't been paid yet, he'll be thanking him as well. Um, massive contract. But when you're the Panthers and you've sucked for as long as you've had, you kind of have to overpay for something like that. And J.C. Horn is deserving of getting a bag. Whether it's that much, we don't know.
Yeah. So we'll see with Carolina. They didn't make like huge waves in the offseason here. You do get Rico Dowdle, and I think that's going to be good for your team because I do think Chuba Hubbard's a good running back. So I think him and Dowdle can be a good duo for you. So overall, fine for the Carolina Panthers, nothing mind blowing. And then for the Saints, they did sign Justin Reed, and I really don't think it matters because I don't think the Saints season next year is really going to matter too much. But I want to know what you think of this contract. So Jawan Johnson resigns to a 3-year, $30 million deal worth up to $34 million for Jawan Johnson. And you want to know why you're in cap hell? I think I found your reason, and $20 million of this is guaranteed.
Yeah, that is puzzling to me. I'm trying to look at their signing. Was it worth it? No, he had 500 receiving yards last year. He's gonna make he's gonna make $10 million next year, despite the fact that he is like their fourth option ultimately. This team that is the only team left in free agency that has negative, I think, $40 million in cap space and are perpetually in cap hell. It's because like you don't think you could have replaced Jawan Johnson, who by the way is going to be 29 when you enter the season. You can't replace him with any of the receivers in the draft. No, you have to go out and sign him to 35 million. The Saints are going to Saint. That's what I'm going to say. And this is why they're always in cap hell. Good job.
Yeah, no, always in cap hell. And then we move on from the Saints, who decided to give Juwan Johnson, tight end, for them $21 million guaranteed. Go to Tampa Bay, and they re signed Kyle Trask. Yeah, a lot of people remember him getting drafted and haven't seen from him since. He got re signed to a $2.78 million deal. Then they also agreed to sign Hassan Reddick and crept Chris Godwin. So really solid offseason for Tampa Bay here. I feel like you get Hassan Reddick on a 1-year mercenary type deal, 12 million guaranteed, and then we part ways.
Yeah, Hassan Reddick is still a really good player. He's a little bit past his prime now, but all of last year he barely played because the Jets traded for him to pay him and then didn't pay him. So he's like, I'm not going to play for you until you pay me. And then they just didn't pay him ultimately. So now he gets paid the money he deserves in Tampa, where he should be a lot happier. And Chris Godwin returns. We thought we would lose Chris Godwin in the offseason. You got him for a discount. He took a discount to stay with Tampa Bay. So I feel like I mean, this has been like a perfect job for them, ultimately, what they could have asked for. So
Yeah,
credits to them.
they've been on a solid run. That run's kind of continuing. You're bringing in more talent, and I feel like Tampa has drafted well over the past few years. So solid for Tampa Bay. That concludes our road trip through the NFC South here. We move west to where you are. And really, the news was the Arizona Cardinals had a huge free agency on the defensive side of the ball. They signed Josh Sweat to a 4-year contract worth $76 million. $41 million of this is guaranteed for an older edge rusher. Then you also have Delvin Tomlinson on the defensive line. Then you also sign Akeem Davis Gaither, and then you get Aaron Brewer, and then you sign Jacoby Brissett and re-sign some offensive linemen. But yeah, big defensive free agency for Arizona. What do you think of the Josh Sweat contract?
Hopefully, it doesn't go back to bite them in the ass. They needed to sign someone like Josh Sweat, and they're in a position where they kind of have to overpay. Their defense was abysmal last year. They couldn't stop a fucking nosebleed. So good for the Cardinals for going out there and making moves defensively. We'll see what I mean. This is their last hope with Jonathan Gannon. Maybe Jonathan Gannon is what they said he is. And going out and getting defensive talent, I can respect it. Um, so yeah, and then they get Jacoby Brissett as a backup, which I think is fine. Ultimately, I don't think that they're going to be contending for a while. So they're going to need to make some more moves in the draft. But I think it's a good start getting some defensive talent. They should be behind the Rams, but I think with the 49ers and the Seahawks moves, I think that they should still be, um, competing for the wild card, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll see. And this is another like kind of comes down to your draft, but at least you added some talent on defense and you get Jacoby Brissett. I don't love it, personally. And then after that, we have the franchise on fire, the LA Rams here. They move on from Cooper Cup and they say, "You're an old wide receiver. We don't need to overpay for any old wide receivers." And then you go out there and you sign Devontae Adams to a 2-year contract worth $46 million. $26 million of this is guaranteed, voidable on the um contingency as long as Devontae doesn't play with Jimmy Garoppolo. He will be fine in LA.
That is insane. I mean, they're doing the exact same thing that they did to Cooper Cup that they did to Jared Goff ultimately. They broke up with him to replace him with somebody who is a little bit better. I would say Devontae is definitely better than Cooper Cup, but at one point the conversation was pretty close, and I felt like it was the same with Goff and Stafford. They break up with him. He's cut. He's homeless now, holding a cardboard box outside of SoFi Stadium. Devontae comes in there. I wasn't surprised by him signing with the Rams whatsoever. Um, but I mean, did they get a little bit better? Really depends on the health of Devontae. I think, pairing him with Puka will be an interesting pairing. But I think it's kind of, I mean, they could have done Cooper Cup a little bit better than that, in my opinion. But it is a business, so I can't give them too much shit for it, I suppose.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with the Rams, but I feel like if you're gonna pay Devontae that much money and you give up Cooper Cup, it seems like you already have Cooper Cup there. You already have chemistry with him. I just don't get the point of that. And then you're gonna have Stafford there too. But I guess you sign him on a 2-year deal. That's probably what Stafford's timeline is gonna be like as well. So we'll see how that plays out for the Rams. And then the 49ers talked about how the Ravens signed literally every player you couldn't name. Well, outside of Mac Jones, no one knows who any of these players are. They went out there and signed Mac Jones, Demarcus Robinson, Luke Farrell, Ben Barch, Luke Gifford, and Richie Grant.
Yeah, I know two of those players. I know two of them. So my opinion is I don't have one. I can honestly talk about more about who they got rid of, like trading Debo for a fifth round pick, getting rid of Javon Hargrave, getting rid of Kyle Juszczyk. The 49ers, the team that was constructed 2 years ago for the Super Bowl, is getting gutted alive at this point. So that's really more the narrative for the Niners. Their offseason, it's clear what they're doing, but with what they've received in return, it's been it's they're they're not going to be contending. No, there's no way. Especially if you're going to pay Brock Purdy, which would be a mistake at this point. At this point, just suck and get another quarterback.
Especially since you lost Ufunga and Trey Greenlaw to the Broncos, like that's one team alone, and then like Kyle Juszczyk just feels like the end of an era when you hear that guy gets cut. Like that, like kind of hurt when I saw Kyle Juszczyk get cut because like he's a fullback, so like it kind of felt like they kicked him out, and he's not really gonna have a home anymore. It's like when someone like releasing like a dog in their backyard and like go away and never come back. It's like there's nowhere else for him to go. Like what else is Kyle Juszczyk gonna do in the NFL? No one's gonna like, oh yeah, we
It's
need a
gonna be like the
fullback.
day. It's gonna be like the day the Saints cut Taysom Hill. It's the same
Yeah,
parallel. It's like, where's he gonna go? The only home he can call is San Francisco. Nobody's gonna sign Kyle Juszczyk. Like he's just basically he's gonna just be collecting unemployment checks at this point. You know
the
what is he gonna
Eagles
do
might
as a
sign him.
poor? I'm curious who's tied to him, but I don't like either way. Like I just don't think it's gonna be the same. It's not gonna feel the same ultimately. I just don't know who's gonna be interested, but it does hurt nonetheless. Lastly, we have the Seahawks. The Seahawks did make some moves. What did they do?
The Seahawks, they went out there and you know what? If you get rid of DK Metcalf, why don't you replace him with a better deep threat? MVS. And then you go out there, you get rid of Geno Smith. Why don't you replace him with a worse quarterback here and sign him to a worse deal that you signed Geno Smith to? You gave Sam Darnold, $55 million guaranteed. 37 million of that is in the first year, so you can get out of it pretty quickly. So you're essentially saying he's a bridge quarterback, but like I'm kind of impressed and surprised that Sam Darnold went out into the free agency market and I feel like he got exactly what he earned last season. I feel like that's a perfect amount to pay for Sam Darnold. 37 million, 55 of it guaranteed. So you're really only taking an $18 million cap hit if you cut him the next year.
Yeah, I'm looking at the contract. You're right. This is exactly how it's constructed. It is kind of like a low risk, low reward for the Seahawks. I think that he deserved to get some sort of contract. I'm glad it wasn't quite like the Baker Mayfield deal. Um, my question is like, if you're getting rid of Geno Smith, you're getting rid of DK, and you're getting rid of Tyler Lockett, and you're basically it feels like you're doing a full reboot. Then why would you go out there and sign Sam Darnold, who is going to ultimately make you a better team? You know, if he plays like he played in Minnesota. So I just don't really know what they're doing at this point. They have a young coach, defensive coordinator, ultimately, but everybody that you got rid of, you replaced with somebody who's marginally worse than the other player. I mean, MVS and DK, obviously, it's not very close, but Geno Smith and Sam Darnold, to me, they don't seem like they're that much better or worse than one another. You can honestly argue who's better or worse. So I just don't. I don't know what what are they doing at this point? What's your goal? Are you trying to be suck so that next draft you can draft a quarterback? What do you do? Like Seahawks, tell me what you're doing. I don't know what the vision is at this point.
Yeah, I think with Seattle, Geno Smith is going to be due for another contract, and I think Vegas is on a trajectory where they can give him more guaranteed money, at least for like a solid guaranteed year upfront next year. And I think with Sam Darnold, you come over and then there's not really a home for him, but he does kind of deserve to get paid. So you're like, all right, we'll bring Sam Darnold on. We'll set it up so he'll be playing here for a year and he will be marginally worse, but we'll still be competing. It won't be a full rebuild, but we'll have assets to trade to get up there and get our quarterback next year and kind of play it out and suck this year and see maybe we draft someone and have him sit behind Sam Darnold, but it's set up in a situation where it seems like the plan is just to find a quarterback either this year or next year and then move on from Sam Darnold because I feel like Sam Darnold like he had everything go right for him last year and he still crumbled to a blitz last year. So I feel like he's going to be pretty horrific for Seattle next year. And I feel like he's in a much worse situation. Your number one receiver now. No disrespect to Jackson Smith and Jigba, but the gap in skill between Jackson Smith and Jigba and Justin Jefferson, it's closer between him and Jackson Smith and Jigba. and then that's your number one wide receiver at this point. So it's like I feel like Sam Darnold's going to have a really tough time in Seattle, but it sets yourself up to still contend, kind of like tank, but not necessarily tank, and then get your quarterback the following year. And then Vegas can potentially pay Geno Smith, and then he can just move on because I feel like Geno needed a fresh start and he needed to get out of Seattle.
Yeah, I can understand. I think the Seahawks could ultimately be one of the more disappointing teams next year, especially like Sam Darnold hasn't been good anywhere except for Minnesota. And at the end of the Minnesota era, it wasn't pretty either. So Sam Darnold gets money that he rightfully has earned at this point. He's going to make 100 million hopefully. And then, you know, I'm glad Minnesota didn't make the mistake of re-signing him, especially when you have a rookie quarterback. So I think it all kind of worked out in the end. It's going to be interesting to see how he plays in Seattle. I do think the Seahawks, maybe they're interested in getting another receiver in the draft and do a full rebuild. It feels like maybe Darnold fits their timeline better, but um, ultimately I feel like it's more of a high risk, low reward with Darnold because he's not going to bring you to the promised land ultimately.
No, he's not gonna bring you to the promised land, but I feel like it kind of makes sense that he's in Seattle. You go out there and draft a quarterback, and you're probably not going to make the playoffs with him this year. But guess what? You didn't make the playoffs last year either, and you didn't spend like a ton of money in free agency. So it's like you kind of have the cash to burn this year on him, and then you're not taking a huge hit if you move on from him.
Yeah, but this is every team that has made a move this off season so far. Free agency signing, we went through all 32 teams, all signings, trades, and cuts as well. So we went and broke it all down here.
We
Now,
did it.
I'm a man of I'm a man of negativity, and you're a man of positivity. So as we conclude the NFL offseason recap to this point here, going over the best of the worst and the worst of the best, ultimately in our top fives here. Shall we go? Should I go first, or should you go first? Ultimately,
Yeah, I think we get the negative out of the way. We go over and break down the five worst signings, teams, worst events that happened in the first week of free agency and the new calendar year of the NFL. It's time for a new edition of the worst top five, according to Brick Jameson. Leading in, what do you got for us this week?
so my honorable mention goes to both the Jets and Justin Fields. Ultimately, it's a match made in heaven, but it also is a match made in hell because Justin Fields is going to continue to suck where he's been. And the Jets were so desperate that they needed Justin Fields just as much as Justin Fields needed them. It's an ugly romance, it's a teenage drama, and ultimately, I don't see it doing very much. But wanted to shout that out. Number five, I have the 49ers, simply for all of the moves that they made. They traded Debo Samuel too late. They got a fifth round pick for him. They move on from key players that were fundamental in making their Super Bowl appearance, whether it's Sufunga, whether it's Javon Hargrave, or whether it's Kyle Juszczyk. The 49ers offseason so far, they went from a team that was in contention for the Super Bowl just this past year, had some injuries, and now they are gutting their team alive. They are like a pig that is on fucking Star Wars. I don't know what it is, but they are completely washed at this point. At number four, I have a team that could still potentially contend if they just spent and opened their fucking checkbook. How about number four, Cincinnati? You have your quarterback, something that half of the league cannot say. And not only that, you are one of only five teams that say they have a top five quarterback in the league. The Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, the Bengals, and the Eagles can all say that confidently. And you have an opportunity where you have not one, but two great receivers. You have a great player on the defensive side in Trey Hendrickson, and yet you guys refuse to open the cobwebs that are infecting your wallet. For what exactly? Your team has never been the team to open their wallets for any person, but maybe this should be your exception. Jamar Chase, best receiver in the league last year. T. Higgins, best number two receiver in the league last year. And the only thing that you've done so far this season is re sign Samaje Perine. That was your top priority when you already have Chase Brown. What are we doing? Cincinnati, open your eyes, open your wallets, and please sign Jamar Chase. At number three, I have the Seahawks, simply because I don't know what they're doing exactly. First, I wasn't going to judge them trading for DK or trading away DK. They got some draft capital back. Getting rid of Tyler Lockett. Okay, he's been there for a decade, but you broke up with Geno Smith to sign with Sam Darnold. I can't tell whether you upgraded, whether you stayed the same, or got worse. And for a team that clearly is doing some sort of mix up in their organization, I would think that they would either go one way or another, either trading for somebody who is significantly better than Geno Smith or trading for somebody significantly worse than Geno Smith. But they didn't really do that. Instead, they're going to probably still be 8-9 or 7-10, still in the mix for the playoffs, but still just not good enough to make it ultimately. So the Seahawks are at number 3. At number 2, this team I want to put on this list, but ultimately they didn't fucking do anything this offseason. So where are they? So I called the local police officers. I have called um, the National Guard to track down where the Dallas Cowboys are because it's my understanding that the Cowboys just 2 years ago were 12-5. They had Trayvon Diggs, they had Deron Bland, they had all these great players around them, and they looked like they were on pace to make a Super Bowl. And then last year, a lot of injuries, they sucked. And in order for them to recuperate after the injuries of Dak Prescott, they have done nothing. They have not done a single thing. And not only that, this team has not signed a player over $10 million annually since Greg Hardy of 2015, back when Barack Obama was president, back when people were hitting the dab. Like, this was a different world when the Cowboys were doing that. So please, let's figure this shit out, Cowboys. And then at number 1, a dark time for the city of Indianapolis, a time where we'll look back on this day much like America looks back on Pearl Harbor or 9/11 or Benghazi or any other massive tragedy that has ever occurred in America. That's right. The Colts signing Daniel Jones has to be the worst top 5 signing of the free agency destination simply for the fact Daniel Jones should be playing in Cuba. He should be playing in Canada. He should be playing for the XFL. Hell, this man should be playing Pop Warner football at this point, but he should be playing anywhere other than the NFL. But instead, the Colts give him another opportunity to show the world how much this Duke quarterback is not good at football. So the worst signing goes to the Colts with Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and there you have it. Another killer list of the top 5 worst performers, signings in the NFL offseason so far. Couldn't agree more with Daniel Jones being there. The Seattle Seahawks kind of just wandering around in a paper bag. They just decided to wander in. Just haven't left yet. They just don't know what they're doing. Haven't made up their mind yet at all.
But I'm tired of being negative. It's time to be positive. Open up those documents, brighten our lights, keep our glasses half full. Give us the top 5 best signings according to the Brickyard in this week.
Yeah, and the top 5 best signings according to the Brickyard this week is the Denver Broncos. Broncos showing that they are not messing around this offseason where they go out there, get a speedster, where they go out there and get Trent Sherfield, who is a fast wide receiver there. And then they're going to go out there and then they sign 2 defensive players that were studs for the San Francisco 49er in Dre Greenlaw and Ufunga. I feel like this Broncos team is showing that they're pushing the trajectory higher next season, not only defensively, but offensively. You're going out there and picking up talent. So I feel like this is going to be a good year for the Broncos next year. You already have been teetering on another Super Bowl defense, and I feel like those moves really help push the Broncos defense in the right direction this year, going out there getting 2 Niners studs this year. So at number 5, have the Denver Broncos here. At number 4, we have the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel coming out here right away, letting people know like the Patriots aren't messing around this year. We go out there, we get Milton Williams, they get Kyrus Tonga, and then they also go out there, get Bob Spillane, Carlton Davis to go out there and pair him with Christian Gonzalez. You get Mac Hollins, who has hands, so he is a wide receiver who can make catches, which I think is a very important thing for the New England Patriots and something they haven't had since Tom Brady has left and since we had Julian Edelman on that team. And then they also go out there and get a solid backup quarterback in Josh Dobbs. So at number 4, I feel like the New England Patriots have done a really good job so far this offseason. And then at number three, we have the Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Bears go out there, acquire three offensive linemen. Two you get with the trade, and you go out there and you get Joe Tooney. Then you go out there and you get Grady Jarrett, who's one of the best defensive linemen available here. I feel like the Chicago Bears building something special. You already have a lot of good weapons there. You have some good talent on offense. Then you go out there, get three players on the offensive line, showing that you're addressing that issue. You're going to keep Caleb Williams upright. Feel like the Bears have made huge strides to improve this offseason, and hopefully you take the next step for the sake of their fans with Ben Johnson, because this team has never had a good quarterback in NFL history. So let's hope they can do it next season. And then at number two, I have the Houston Texans. You go out there in back to back off seasons, and I feel like are aggressive and win where you have a lot of cap space, and you go out there and you trade a seventh round pick, essentially give up nothing for Christian Kirk. Then you go out there and then you trade for CJ Gardner Johnson. You have him come in at safety, who's going to be an excellent piece for you. He led the league in turnovers when he was with the Lions. Then he goes to Seattle, goes to Philadelphia, sorry, wins a Super Bowl with them last year. I feel like those are two really solid pickups for them. Then you also go out there, you get players just like Braxton Berrios, you get some wide receiver depth, you get some depth on the offensive line and defense. I feel like overall it was a really solid free agency for the Houston Texans, and then pairing Christian Kirk with Nico Collins is going to pan out well for them. So at number two, we have the Houston Texans, and then at number one, we have the team who did not make two of the biggest mistakes this offseason, who were not two teams that were a part of the top five worst team, and they single handedly did not participate because they did not re sign Daniel Jones and they did not give Sam Darnold $50 million a year. The Vikings had every right. The media was like, I believe Sam Darnold is a $60 million a year quarterback. I believe he deserves $50 million a year. And the Vikings, like, no, the guy can't handle a blitz. Like, really, the most basic play when you're a quarterback that you need to learn how to pick up a blitz. He can't figure it out, and then they just let Daniel Jones like walk. It was nice having you on the team. We were here to rehabilitate you. There's no expectation you're going to play. We're simply rehabilitating you. Please leave now and go to Indianapolis. And then you kind of like go out there and you're riding out with JJ McCarthy. You go out there, you get some help on the offensive line. You get a lot of help defensively as well. And you don't re sign Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones. Overall, everything considered, I feel like Minnesota just won free agency because they kind of just sat back. And Daniel Jones is like, I'm ready for a contract. And the Minnesota Vikings went, what contract? He's like, the contract I'm looking for? Like, I don't know what you mean. Like, he comes back like, you ready to talk about my contract? Like, what do you mean? What contract? And then at some point, someone else suddenly paid Daniel Jones, and the Vikings just never had to address it. And they're like, thank God.
So the Vikings win not only because of the moves they made, but the moves that they didn't make. Not signing Sam Dangerous, not signing Danny Dimeless. They win for the fact that they did not lose. Vikings at the number one spot, making the top five signings of the NFL offseason so far. Vikings having a great offseason.
No, Vikings are
Well, we
having
went over
a.
the NFL offseason moves. Um, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say we went over the NFL offseason here. The last few bits to talk about here were I went to Vegas, which was eventful. I won't go over everything because it might not be legal. And then what we've consumed recently, which is a good transition to Vegas as well. Um, but talking about what we've been watching, what we've been listening to, pop culture, things that we've digested over the last week or so. Um, I think it's good if you talk about what you've talked about first because mine will transition into Vegas because it relates to it. What have you been watching? What's something you want to shout out ultimately, good or bad?
Yeah, I watched a couple things this week I want to shout out. I watched a new movie this week called Last Breath, based on a true story with Woody Harrelson. And oh my God, what I will say to you, and as I always kind of knew that this was the most dangerous job subconsciously, but I didn't really realize it was a job until I watched this movie. But it's about oil divers who essentially have to go to the bottom of the ocean to the pipeline where the oil runs through and make repairs, and you're essentially in a dive bell and have to decompress for a certain period of time. And that dive bell is attached to not like a dock, not like a ship, like a typical oil rig. You're just there attached to a boat that's pulling your dive bell. So if something goes wrong, the boat keeps going. You're just kind of stuck there. So essentially, they lower the dive bell to the bottom of the ocean. One of the divers gets ripped off of it where his cable's broken. He's able to make his way to the top of the tower there, but there's like a period of time, and it's based off a true story, so it's not spoiling anything. But he goes like 27 minutes without air and somehow survives. And the twist of the movie was that they never figured out how he survived without oxygen, and he went almost 40 minutes where he was just blacked out. But like, the movie was pretty intense. It's like one of those one-time watch movies that's really good. If you do like an edible, you're in a dark room, it's late at night, I feel like it's a really good movie for that. But it's based off a true story, and it's one of those jobs that not a lot of people think about, but it's the most dangerous job in the world. It's something where people act tough, and it's like, you're not tough. Are you a welder on an oil rig? Didn't think so.
That's interesting. So they're basically repairing. Are they repairing the oil rig themselves, or they basically
They're
have to go
replacing parts.
underwater to repair it?
Yeah, so you
So
have
you have
to
to fix
dive because
parts
it's
that
in
are
the ocean.
underwater. I don't. First of all, yeah, that sounds like fucking nightmare fuel. I don't know. I never knew anything about this career, but this is a career that I would never ever take part in. I'm curious what the payout is for this because that's ridiculous.
You can make
But it
quite a
was
bit
good.
of
You said
money.
Woody Harrelson was in it.
Yeah, Woody Harrelson's in it. And like, as a diver, you can make quite a bit of money. Like back in the 90s, I knew someone who did it, and he said back in the 90s he was clearing like $100 an hour doing it. But I don't know how
Okay.
much you get paid for it. But it's one of those where you kind of have to pay them a lot just because it is one of the most dangerous jobs. But yeah, so when you have an oil rig in the ocean, like at some point you have to do maintenance and repair it, replace different parts there. But it was at the bottom of the sea in like North Ireland, so you're essentially like 300 feet below sea level. So you just look up and there's a football field of ocean above you, and you're repairing. Then you can't see anything too. And with this, it's not like you're on an oil rig where you're repairing parts there and you're strapped to the rig. This is like they were in a dive bell attached to a boat above in the ocean, which was also like a crazy part of it. This is like, I thought it was an oil rig movie. It's like, oh, I didn't realize you have to sit in there. You have to decompress because you have to get used to the pressure of the ocean. You have to worry about sharks down there. And then also, if something happens with the boat above and it malfunctions, like, you're also screwed.
Yeah, that movie. It sounds like it's good, but it does sound very stressful as well. Um, so that's a good shout. And what's the movie called again?
Yeah, it's called Last Breath. Yeah, if you have any sort of claustrophobia, this movie's gonna make your stomach turn a little bit. But I think it's good.
Okay,
I watched it too. Like,
I
the
see it
movie
here. Yeah.
theater I watched it at was one of the best movie theaters I had went to. It like, you just kind of like had one of those cubby holes where like if you looked, you can see the person next to you. So like each, like, it was like just two-seat cubicles.
Okay. This was out in Austin. You said.
Yeah, yeah. It's called I Pick.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I see that this just launched. This just came out a week ago, 2 weeks ago,
Yeah,
just about. So definitely worth it. Okay. Hell yeah. Um, so my movie of the week. It's this time. It's not about old person getting hit by a nuclear bomb or the Avengers. This time, it's an album inspired by my recent road trip to Las Vegas. Me and two of my childhood best friends went to Vegas, like everybody else who goes to Vegas, to be fucking degenerates. To be completely honest, that's the way I would describe it. And an album that was consistently on rotation in that trip was weekends after hours. This mainly for the fact that the album Blinding, I mean, the song Blinding Lights is about Vegas itself, but a lot of the themes of the album, with both like the highs of a song like Heartless or After Hours, and then the low points of like Until I Bleed Out, um, and then a number of other songs on this album. This album, I think, perfectly encapsulates anybody who hasn't been to Vegas. This album both has the highs of Vegas. You know, my friend at one point was up $2,000 gambling. The next night, it's all gambled away. He had the low points. I certainly had my low points at one point during the trip as well. So I just think, if you're a pop fan, this album is a quintessential 2020s pop record. Probably, if there's a top 25 albums of the 2020s so far, this probably has to be on there. And then ultimately, I think it's also a good album that signifies a certain city very well. Just like with how Frank Sinatra's New York, New York fits there, or feels like every Dropkick Murphy song ever signifies Boston. There's just certain songs and certain albums that signify a certain um, city. And I feel like this album signifies Vegas very well. So I would shout
Is
it
he
out. If
from
you,
there?
I assume you've listened to it, Liz. He's not from there, but this in LA is like his cities of New York um, uh, America that he spends a lot of time in. He spends most of his time in LA, but Vegas is where he does pretty much all of his degenerate shit, like everybody else ultimately. So I'm sure you've all heard it. I mean, Blinding Lights is the biggest streaming song ever. And then obviously, like, Heartless was huge. After Hours was huge. Alone Again was huge. So, great album over all around, um, is what I would shout out for this week. Because it's been in rotation since the trip and then during the trip, especially. Um, Coming down from the highs of Vegas.
Yeah, it's a
But the
good pop
Vegas trip
album.
itself, yeah, it's a great album. It's a great pop album. But the Vegas trip itself was eventful. The main story that I could take away, at least for the show, is I got kicked out of the Sphere. That was something that
What?
wasn't on my bingo card, but it's funny that I got kicked out of the Sphere.
So how's it work with the
So,
Sphere in Vegas? Is it like when you go there, can you just like go there during the day where they do stuff?
so it's weird. It's like the Sphere is almost like conference center most times, but then it's a concert venue, like maybe 2 or 3 nights a week. And there wasn't a concert there, so we couldn't go inside of the Sphere, but we could at least see it up close. And it's basically just like a big bubble is what I would describe it as. Like it looks a lot bigger on TV, but realistically it's like maybe the size of like your apartment complex, maybe smaller, but like just one building. And it's just a bunch of screens and it just keeps changing its appearance every like 30 seconds. Like at one point it was like the fucking what is it called, the Death Star from Star Wars, and then it went from the Death Star to like SpongeBob to like an advertisement for T-Mobile to nothing. Like it just keeps changing like every 30 seconds to a minute, and it's just like this little dome, but like not that big of a dome either. Um, so it's a cool. I mean, it's a place I would see a concert in, but the Sphere is definitely overrated. The funny part about it, I don't smoke cigarettes regularly, but when I'm traveling like in a city like Vegas, I bought a pack of cigarettes to smoke, and you can smoke everywhere inside. Like every casino allows for it. I was smoking cigarettes at the Bellagio, just ashing it on their nice marble floors, and then I'm walking to the Sphere and I'm smoking cigarettes like it's going out of style, like chain smoking them ultimately because we've been drinking and everything, along with other things. And so I'm just ripping butts, ripping butts. We're walking to the Sphere, which felt like it took like an hour to get there. And then we finally get to the Sphere. I take a look outside and I'm just fucking ripping my butt. And then this fucking security guard is like, "Wait, are you smoking? Were you smoking in there? You can't smoke inside the Sphere. What the fuck's the matter with you?" And I'm just like, no, as my cigarette's lit at the time. So he kicks me out of the Sphere and I finish the rest of my cigarette. And then my buddies that are with me, he just goes up to them. He's like, "This your genius?" and just kicks them out as well. So we all got kicked out of the sphere. We ended up just walking back. We had to not only we couldn't go through the other way, which is like the not only the safer way, but like the less gross way, like going underneath like all the buildings. They basically made us go all the way around this like the sphere building, um, around like the high, like basically like going around the highway and fucking all these places
The homeless
because I
camps
smoked a
are
cigarette
always
like an
under the
asshole.
highways.
Yeah, luckily all the homeless people were somewhere else. But it
They
was
were
just wild.
scheming somewhere
It was a
else.
wild time. Yeah, I feel like homeless people are never in the right place at the right time. Like
No.
prime example, like when I moved from New Hampshire to Arizona, I had like so much food I was ready to give these people, and they were nowhere to be found. These people, whether it's if it's raining, they're nowhere to be. They don't show up in the rain. They take the day off. It's like they take fucking PTO days there. And
Yeah.
then ultimately, when you need to give them something, like my mom, she gave me a bag of, you know how my mom gives me gummy bears. She gives me like fucking enough to feed a family of fucking 30. I have these gummy bears and I'm about to like the homeless people are about to cook right now. They're going to be so happy with what I'm about to do. And I couldn't find a homeless person in Phoenix, Arizona for 2 weeks. They were nowhere to be found. When I went to go give them something, they were nowhere. And then, as soon as I give my gummy bears away to a friend, where do they show up the very next time I go out? They're fucking right there with their sign. So I swear, homeless people, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Always.
Yeah, no. It's
It's,
tricky. You got to track them down.
but I shouldn't have to. You're homeless. Why is it hard for me to find you? I have a house to stay at. You don't. You should just be easy to just come like if I just go to the bridge that you stay at, I should just find you there. But you're not there. You're gone. You're away. I don't get it. The cheese ball. Remember the
Yeah.
cheese balls that we had? The cheese balls.
Yeah.
Tried to give that away for a month. Nowhere. Couldn't find them at all. Nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
They took the week off. They went on vacation.
Yeah, I don't understand too, like with homeless people, like why don't they migrate? Like, wouldn't you want to like walk south in the summer so you I get you could pass out of like heat stroke, but like is passing out of heat stroke really worse and then maybe you don't wake up versus like a winter staying outside in a tent? Like imagine like choosing to be homeless in North Dakota. It's like the worst place to be homeless. Not only do you have like bears, wolves, elk, there's nothing there unless you're super into nature and you like to hike and there's a lot of cool nature areas, but like it's negative 20 degrees. You're in a tent in the woods when you could walk down south to like Florida or something.
Yeah. I don't know why you don't. I mean, I feel like you easily could. It's not like you have, as bad as it sounds, you don't have a family, you know? Just walk, just go down and just slowly make your way down. Just hop on a few buses. It's not like you have to pay for the bus more often than not. Like, you could probably do it if you really set your mind to it. But I guess that's maybe the problem with homeless people. I don't know.
Yeah, they're always figuring stuff out too. Like you'll like give them an idea, they're like, "No, I'm figuring it out." Oh, okay. Like my first
All
day,
right.
like New England, you have to do like your community service. Like you have to work at the number one Mexican cuisine in New England, which is Taco Bell. You have to work at Dunkin' Donuts, or you have to work at McDonald's. And I chose to work at Dunkin' Donuts because it seemed like I'm like, if I'm gonna work in fast food, I feel like coffee is like the least gross out of all of it. Like they didn't have like too much like bad stuff that I didn't want to work with. Like my first day of orientation, there's a homeless guy sleeping under the table where they like sit you into the basement with like one flickering light, and then you just see like cobwebs and spiders everywhere, and they're like, watch this HRVHS tape from the 90s and then come back upstairs and tell us when you're done. Then the homeless guy wakes up under there and you're like, what did I sign up for? Is this a job or
That's insane. They're just chilling in the basement of Dunkin' Donuts. That's wild. Yeah, I don't know. Homeless people got to figure this shit out.
yeah. If you have a
Definitely.
lighter though, they spawn.
But
You try and give a homeless person a lighter, abracadabra.
abracadabra, there they are. Yeah. But we talked about the NFL offseason, the latest moves across the NFL. We talked about what we've been watching, a little bit of the Vegas trip here. Make sure to tune in next Wednesday as we go over the latest NFL and NBA news as well. Maybe previewing a draft. Who knows? Stay tuned for all the things Brickyard related, but most importantly of all, stay
Stay
brick.
brick.
I'm going to write that bit down. That's a bit about homeless people.
The whole they're nowhere to